Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining myself and Isabella, who is yet to join us on our webinar this evening. So for those of you who maybe have just stumbled across these or you've been referred here by a friend or a family member, let me give you some context before we begin our webinar tonight around why it is that we're here. So Superheroes is a not-for-profit organisation that specialises in helping children and families around the areas of mental and emotional well-being. And we've been very lucky to receive some funding from the National Lottery, which is to run a series of webinars specifically for single and lone parents in different areas, really. So partly for self-development, but partly addressing the challenges that parents, specifically single parents, might face. So we've got a whole range of different subject areas that we are covering up until the end of March. If you are not as yet signed up to the Superheroes YouTube channel, we'll be pinging over emails over the next few days so that you have got access to those. And basically, you'll then be able to watch the entire back catalogue of webinars that we have done so far, and all of the new ones come into place as well will also be listed on that YouTube channel for you to watch. So if for any reason you needed to zip off a bit early, maybe one of the kids get out of bed part way through the webinar, you will be able to catch up on this a little bit later. So that's a little bit of context around how we've come to be here today. A couple of other bits to mention. So Superheroes, as I said, is a not-for-profit organisation, and therefore we are only really able to provide the work that we do as a result of the kind donations slash little bits of funding that we're able to access from time to time. So if you haven't already and you're in a position to be able to do so, please visit superheroes.org/funding, where you'll be able to make a donation of whatever size you choose, and we put as much as we possibly can actually into the costs of helping children, young people and their families around their mental and emotional well-being. So please give if you can. It does make a massive difference. And one more thing to mention before we kick off and get started is that we have as well, through one of our sister companies, a membership program that is available, and via that membership program you're able to access content like this on a monthly basis. So we send out videos, we send out webinar invitations, you're even able to start doing some qualifications through it around becoming a practitioner working with children and young people. You are able to access podcasts, articles, games that you can do with your children, all sorts of different things. So if that's something that's of interest to you, it costs £5.99 per month, and I will send you over a link. In fact, what I will do is I will put it in an email to you, but I'll also put it on the description box of the YouTube channel. If you sign up through that link, then that's linked specifically will send £1 back into Superheroes every single month, and you can cancel at any time. So that's all of my housekeeping duties. I see that Isabella is now here, and in fact I saw her a second ago and then she disappeared again, so I'm going to send you a webcam request. There she is. Good evening to you.
Hello, good evening. Apologies for a slight delay. I had challenges with the internet.
Oh no.
Everything is home and working on their devices, so the internet is just
Got used up.
Mm.
Well, lovely to see you. You're looking lovely this evening, unlike me, where I'm just like wrapped up in woolens because my house is freezing today.
Really?
Yeah,
the weather isn't ideal today. Yeah.
Not ideal today, no. But I like that we've almost coordinated our outfits colour-wise.
That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
All right, fab. So I know we spoke briefly earlier. I've got some NLP-ish bits and pieces that I think I could really throw at this subject area today. You've got a case study that we're going to look at too. And then I think after that we'll see who's around, if there's any questions, and we'll kind of pick it up from there. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good to me. I just want to warn you and the parents about my throat. I've got a funny, tickly throat. I don't know what it is. No COVID because I've been tested. I need to because I do some work in a Polish school on Saturdays as well. So I have
Right.
to do that home testing on a regular basis. Just regular cold something. So if I have to cough, I will mute myself and possibly switch my camera off. If I disappear, it is either my internet or me coughing in the background.
The joys of working from home.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, good stuff. So I thought that I would kick us off. I actually just looked up a definition of what criticism means. This is what Google's brought up for me. The expression of disapproval of someone or something on the basis of perceived faults or mistakes. And I thought that was really interesting because and I know you've sort of dealt quite a lot with sort of people in the workplace as well, Isabella, but I noticed how sometimes people almost kind of announce and sort of invite you in for, you know, I just want to give you a critique of your work. And of course, the word like critique is coming from criticism. And so really what they're telling us is, I'd just like to express some disapproval and let you know about the mistakes that you're making, which just kind of makes me go, oh God, that's just like, that makes me feel cringe. That's horrible.
Yes, and I think the strongest memories of that I've got from my corporate work when I had regular reviews with my managers or senior leaders, and there was always very criticism, I would say. Those days, I think we knew very little about the constructive criticism and a feedback sandwich and all those things that I'm sure we will mention later. So yes, the memories are quite cringy.
So actually, it's first on my list is to talk about the feedback sandwich. So one of the things that we're very conscious of doing in NLP is when we need to critique or criticize, because we're so conscious of language and the impact that that has on people, we don't ever refer to it as a critique or a criticism. We refer to it as feedback. And we have a very specific structure for how we give feedback when we're working within an NLP frame. So NLP, for those of you that don't know, it stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And I'll just literally draw this out for you. So in terms of what a feedback sandwich visibly looks like, you start out with what was good or what someone is doing well already, and that's like your first layer of bread in your sandwich. Okay, so what was good. Your next layer from there is, I guess, what we might otherwise think of as being the critique portion, and that is the what could be better. So what we actually say is what could be even better next time. And there's this very important reason why we do this and why we don't say this is what you've done wrong, this is where you've screwed up. We really avoid framing it in that way. So we talk, first of all, we say this is what was good, and then we go to this is what could be better. And then we finish off with an overall, this is what was great. Okay, and that's where we land afterwards. So it sounds like a sort of very simple, you know, okay, that makes sense as a structure, but there's actually some really important fundamental reasons why we structure it in that particular way. So first of all, that starting out with this is what was good is a way of building rapport with whoever we're talking to and getting them to feel at ease. And most importantly, we want to get them listening. So we always go in first of all with this is what you're doing really well. And then we follow with this is what could be even better next time around. And the reason why we phrase it in that specific way is because when you start talking to someone about the things that you want to criticize them on, they start picturing in their mind the thing that they're currently perhaps not doing all that well. And we refer to that as a form of visual rehearsal. So visual rehearsal is when you imagine doing something, and as a result of imagining it, your entire neurology is in practice mode. It's actually practicing doing those things. So we see this is used in things like Olympic programs for training athletes. They have them imagine doing their event and doing it really well. And even though they're not actually, you know, on the track doing their event, just the fact that they're sat there imagining it with their eyes closed gets their body kind of fired up and ready to do it. And their brain starts getting in touch with, you know, the different muscles and limbs that they would be using. So this visual rehearsal is super powerful because you can really hardwire certain ways in which you want to react. So when we say to someone, listen, this is where you've really ballsed it up and gone terribly wrong, and they start imagining themselves doing that, they're actually hardwiring the thing that we don't want them to do. Whereas if we say to them, this is how to do it even better for next time around, they start imagining doing it even better next time around. And so they start hardwiring in the way that we want them to be and what we want them to do. And then we finish off with that summary of overall, this is what you've done great, because then that just makes it like lovely and digestible at the end of it. So that's why we structure our feedback sandwiches in that way. Bella, I know you would have got like bags of feedback when you were going through your NLP training, as did I. How did you find that landed with you when you got feedback in that particular format?
It was definitely the massive difference comparing to what I've just mentioned a moment ago, getting that, you know, harsh, no compassion type of critique in the past. But I also have an experience with delivering that kind of feedback in schools when I see teachers, or even myself when I deliver workshops, how massive impact it has on little ones or young people, university, colleges. As you said, just wiring their thinking into, I can actually do it, I can do it better, is a massive difference. We are harsh on ourselves anyway. We don't need anyone to be more tough and judgmental, because it will just drag us down. So it definitely helps and make a massive, massive difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think it almost sort of builds in hope. It's like saying to the person, like, I can see you doing better. You should be able to see you doing
Yes,
better as
absolutely.
well, which I think works really well. Now, I have also had a couple of experiences from less favourable NLPers of mine, where they kind of use that middle section to not just deliver the constructive feedback, but, you know, to just throw in a little bit of shade as well. And so I remember I was actually speaking at an event where a load of people that had NLP trained with me when I was going through the training were also present. So, you know, it's always like it was really hammered into me in my training that when you've delivered a presentation, you go and you ask for, like, you're proactively saying, give me feedback, you know, tell me what I could do even better. And I'd done this speaking gig, and it was quite a sort of emotional one, and it was, you know, I like to think it was sort of quite a moving and powerful one. And there was one of my sort of NLP co-trainees that were there. And so after I was finished, I said to her, okay, hit me with it. What's the feedback? And so she used feedback sandwich, and it was great. But when she got to the middle bit, she said, so I was wearing like a black dress and I had like brightly coloured tights on because I like to have a little bit of colour. And she said, final piece of feedback is never wear those tights again. They were really distracting and nobody wants to see that. And I was just like, okay. And so I've had that experience. And one of the best things that I learned, again, on my NLP training, is that your only response to feedback / criticism is thank you for the feedback. And I found that to be just, it just helps me to kind of say, you know what, I don't have to take on board everything that you're saying right now. It doesn't have to come to me personally. And so I've used that a lot, where I just go, thank you for the feedback. And it's just my way of sort of going, you know what, I can take it or leave it. I don't have to fully embody this. Most recently, I had a critique from someone where it was actually just really rude. And again, it was about my appearance. And on that particular occasion, my response was, thank you for your opinion, because it wasn't even feedback.
There is a massive difference. When I was doing research today for our show, for our workshop, I read some stats about the criticism, and apparently 70% of us enter a negative emotional state when receiving criticism. 20% of people reject criticism, and 10%, only 10%, listen and maintain some kind of neutral state of mind or emotional state. And that was absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking that we're still that strongly affected by the feedback, by the comments. And yeah,
it would be really interesting to know whether those statistics remain the same depending on how that feedback is given and what kind of structure they put behind it.
Well, the article was split between two types of feedback, so I think it was more general rather than specific to the circumstances, but they were talking about two types of criticism that we either receive that malicious, the meaning type of really someone want to bring you down, and they deliberately saying those harsh words and like going straight to the point without any silver lining. And the other one is the constructive criticism, is something that is that, sandwich feedback, when we listen, when the intention of the person providing the feedback is to improve, to give us that space to grow and to be better. So it was interesting that there is a big difference.
Super interesting. I would say one of the other things that I found really helpful, and again, it kind of comes from an NLP perspective. So one of the things that we do when we're doing therapeutic work with people, in some of our processes, we might ask our client to be what we refer to as fully associated, which means that you are in your body like you are right now, just living life through your own eyes. And we might even ask them to refer back to an event that's happened to them in the past and get them to reimagine it all over again as if they were back there in their body looking out through their own eyes. So that's what we call fully associated. On the flip side, we have what we refer to as dissociated, which is when you kind of step outside of yourself, you see yourself like a separate person, like an actor or an actress. And often we do that if someone's dealing with a trauma or, reflecting on a trauma, so that they don't have to kind of relive the experience back through their own eyes all over again. Instead, they kind of go, there's me having a bad experience, but it's not me. It's, they're separate from me now. And when I was doing my trainer's training, which is the qualification that allowed me to teach, the feedback on that training was really brutal. And they actually put us through a day's training where they behaved like your worst audience. Like that was your job. If you're an audience member, you had to heckle, you had to be rude. And we'd all, like in advance of the course, written down like what our greatest fears around public speaking were. So they had this like really comprehensive list of the stuff that we were worried about. And then they did that to us. Like they put us in our own worst case scenarios. So it would be like, oh, here's JJ. She's really worried about someone being abusive because she's overweight and making fun of her. So you need to make fun of her about that. So like deliberately putting us into highly critical situations. But at the same time, they taught us this technique of dissociating from ourselves, so that if we received bad feedback, we didn't have to take it so personally. You know, it was more like viewing yourself like a product, so that you kind of step out and you go, like, this product of me is receiving some negative feedback right now, but you don't have to be hurt by it, because it's a bit like if somebody said, you know, I don't like your mobile phone. Hopefully you wouldn't be personally offended by that, because they're just talking about a product. They're not actually, you know, being critical of you. But when they're being critical of you, it's much easier to take offense to it. So by dissociating yourself and sort of seeing yourself as like they're talking about the product of me, but not actually who I am in my soul, then I found that to be quite a useful strategy for dealing with some of the harsher criticism that I received throughout that training.
I remember from our training the fast phobia occur when we talk about the cinema, and
Yes.
I remember that was a very, very strong visual representation for me to actually almost see my spirit, my, you know, inner self lifting up and going somewhere else, and then looking at myself. And that is absolutely amazing when you're receiving the feedback and you feel judged. And there is a lot with vulnerabilities and how we exposing ourselves, really. So that is definitely amazing. I still remember the impact that had on me
Yeah,
years
that's it.
back now.
I was actually, so I was doing a webinar last night for this same project for superheroes, and last night it was about anger. So it was specifically a quiz around anger. So I'd done a lot of research to put my quiz questions into place, and there was something that came up that I thought, actually, that's probably going to be quite relevant for today's webinar, and it was around the impact of having an angry, judgmental parent when we're growing up. And it was absolutely shocking. Well, in some respects, it was absolutely shocking that the impact of having an angry, aggressive parent causes damage to the same 3 areas of the brain to the same extent as experiencing sexual abuse as a child. And I was like, whoa, like that's crazy bad. And the reason why I thought that might be relevant to mention today is because I think for a lot of people, they find criticism difficult to swallow and handle because of receiving criticism whilst they were growing up. Would you say that that's kind of in alignment with what you've learned whilst you've been a practitioner?
Absolutely. And I think that is totally in line with the case study that I want to present later. That is definitely the case of my own childhood when growing up in the environment, not in my own home, but in my neighborhood. In those days, I come from Poland, and those were the times of communism. So there was a lot of working class families, and many of parents were working sometimes 2 shifts or 3 if they could, and their only free time was to get together and have a drink. So it was a lot of alcoholism in the families, and the frustrations that probably parents were gaining from work, you know, when they were being told off for not doing something, then they took out on their kids.
Yeah.
And I saw so many of my, sorry, I can hear my voice really going horsey. Apologies for that. I remember many of my friends really suffering. They, you know, from lack of confidence to complete, to the point that they actually believe they're worthless. They believe that because the parents were the only authority in their life, they haven't had that much connection or relationship with teachers at those days, and the parents were the closest, so they believed if dad or mom or someone told them that they are stupid or they're worthless or they can't do things right, after, you know, a certain amount of time, they just believed them, and that had a massive impact on them, their grown-up life. Some of them I'm still in contact with, and I know they fully aware of it now because of how much we've learned about our mental health and our brain, the neuroscience and all that. But they still admit that it had a massive, massive impact on their entire life and growing up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that often it can go one of two ways. If you go through an extended period of criticism whilst you're growing up, I think on one hand, there are people that then, when they hear criticism, it affects them just as you've said, where they continue to believe it, and it's almost like that you can tell they're just almost very downbeat on themselves, and they've kind of given up on themselves. There's a sort of almost like a learned helplessness and a sense of hopelessness around them. And then on the flip side, I think the other reaction that people can go to if they've had extended periods of criticism is that in order to sort of regain it, because that hopelessness is like your powerlessness to change it. You know, you don't have the power to make things better. On the flip side, I think the other way that people can go is that they almost go to trying to claw back the power for themselves, and then they respond to criticism with criticism. So it's almost like it becomes like a you know, and a bit of a debate. And I remember being that way when I kind of look back on some of my early jobs, and I'd maybe get called in for a review or an appraisal. You know, an appraisal sounds lovely, but sometimes when you get into an appraisal, it's not as lovely as you think it's going to be. There's not much praise involved. And I remember sometimes becoming very defensive and even a bit aggressive in my responses, because that was the only way I could kind of handle that criticism, was to criticize back. You know, it was almost like they were saying, "You're not very good," and I was like, "Well, you're not very good either."
I had a lot of that in my HR career. So when I was conducting the appraisals, as you said, there were two type of people, either those like me that will look in and said like, oh, almost in tears, and then there will be those who will defend themselves, so almost like bouncing back the ball and passing it across. Definitely.
Yeah. There's a story that I remember. I don't know if this is where it originally came from. It's probably like an old Buddhist proverb or something originally, but I had Tony Robbins telling it, and I thought it was really appropriate for this. And he said something like, I think it ties into what I was just saying there about someone criticizes and then I go back with a bigger criticism. He said that there are two ways to have the tallest building in town. One is that you build the tallest building in town, and the other is that you knock down everybody else's buildings. And I think that there are some people who handle criticism in that way, in the kind of, I'll knock down all of you because you've made me feel bad, and then I'm still the one standing, kind of thing. But I think that there's also people that deliver criticism in that way, and for that purpose of, I feel sometimes some people criticize others because they don't feel good about themselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we feel very little, we try to lift ourselves up a bit by any means, and sometimes not intentionally hurting other people. Very often in relationships, hurting people close to us. I remember even, I think this is one of those lessons when life, universe, or God is sending to you because you have to learn the lesson, and until you do, it just keep replaying. And I did, in my relationship, I did a lot of criticism because I thought that will motivate to change. You know, if I give you that harsh criticism, then you will become a better version of yourself because I know you can. So the intention was positive, but the delivery was really, really poor until I learned how to do it right. And as I said, it just kept coming in my life and was biting my backside because I needed to learn to do it right. Yeah, but I think it was because how I was being brought up and how little I thought about myself then. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
definitely.
One of the other things, again, a bit of an NLP angle on things, is how we label the experiences that we have can make a really big difference. So if we don't call it criticism and we think of it as feedback, or we think of it as an opinion, I don't know about for you, but for me, it shifts things a little bit internally and it just feels more digestible. Is it on
You
your
can
notes?
see on top of my list, changing model operators. So how we talk to ourselves and yeah, verbally as well.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. And I don't know, there is just something around that word, like criticism. It's even like the structure of the word feels spiky to me. You know how like the word bubble feels bouncy, criticism
Yes,
feels
rounded.
so I don't even really like the word very much. Whereas if I think about it as, feedback, opinion, I feel
Yes.
like I can tune into that, I can digest it, I can, maybe take some of it on board. I think there's, so many other things that kind of underpin whether a criticism sounds and feels like a criticism, like the emotional state that you are in when you receive it is going to make a massive difference. The emotional state that the person that's delivering it is in when they deliver it makes a massive difference.
Absolutely. And I think this is where it comes to mind, the map of the world, to think about where that other person is. And if you feel that, there might be something behind that make them say it that way, or maybe something happened in their life. I remember from, I don't know if I should say it openly, but I don't think that he will listen to it. Many years ago, I was, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was still working in one of the global companies, and within the department, it was just myself and my manager. So there was two of us, and we were sitting together in the same room. I went out during my lunch break to do something, and then we were supposed to have the appraisal. So I was due to be, judged. That's how I felt then. Yes, appraised. And the first thing when I received from my lunch, I answered the call on my mobile and respond in Polish. And my boss sitting next to me with his arms crossed like that, he said, couldn't you sort out your personal affairs during your lunch break? I said, this was the bank. I just came back from the bank and they called me because I forgot something. He said, I thought that Polish people only work as a cleaners and he said, as a builders and cleaners. I said, what about me? And in that moment, I think he looked at me and was like, what did I do? He didn't say anything. We didn't have the appraisal that day. It was cancelled. And I think he didn't realize, but then I felt really offended. I felt offended for myself and in general for, people who do cleaning work and work as a builders much harder than he did. But many years after, I think a few months after I went on maternity, I found out that he had some personal issues with the Polish builders in his family, I'm not gonna say the details, but he had a really bitter taste of a Polish builders. So that stayed in his mind so deeply that he just created that unconscious bias, and everything was in that one bag.
Filtering.
Exactly. So definitely now looking and understanding, obviously, from my NLP training, what the map of the world is, and to put ourselves in someone's shoes and try to figure it out if there is anything else behind it, if they are deliberately trying to hurt us, or maybe there is an agenda, or maybe they're just doing it unconsciously.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting you say about that. It made me think of in the office. Again, I don't think they'll see this, but there was one particular person that worked for me who easily became sensitive. I think that would be fair to say, you know, and probably for a whole bunch of different reasons, but was prone to taking things badly. And so I had to be very cautious around how I gave feedback, um, particularly if it was, you know, actually this hasn't been done correctly, or, you know, that kind of stuff where it was quite factual. And I remember we had a conversation one day, and I don't remember what specifically it was, but I said, okay, so this is what you've done. This is the way that we want to be doing it going forward. And she instantly became very offended. And I could kind of see, like, visibly that she shifted. And, you know, it was like her whole demeanor changed. And she got very flushed in the face. And in my brain, I was like, oh, like I've hit that spot. And I instantly, like, my reaction to it, what she kind of responded with, I don't remember what the words were, but the tone of it I remember, and it was like bah, 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 like this in response to me. And then I responded back with, whoa, 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 that's not it, don't need to get yourself stressed out about it. And I kind of said it in such a jovial way that it really, like, instantly it was like someone had just let the air out of a balloon. She just kind of went, oh, like that. And it's because in that moment, I think that she thought that I was being more critical than I was. You know, and I was, you know, just factually saying, it's like that. We really want to do it like this going forward. And it was like an overreaction on her part. And I can only assume that that's because of other criticism that's taken place in the past that, you know, really didn't go down very well. So she was, I think that there's always this kind of push and pull when it comes to criticism, where some people are going to deal with it better than others because some people are less defensive. And if you're dealing with someone who's like super defensive, you could even give them quite a fair or light criticism and they're not going to take it well. And so we, you know, that's really where we need to be, like, really conscious of using our feedback sandwiches instead, and just, you know, making sure that we're very light in how we, you know, discuss things and make sure that they feel heard, and all of that sort of stuff is really important with it too.
It's a little bit like fight and flight response. You either fight because you feel you have to defend yourself, defend your honor, or for whatever reason from your past, or you just run away because that's what you've been doing before.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I think those are kind of like all of, when I kind of rinsed my brain for like, what's all the NLP stuff that I think is appropriate here? That's the stuff I came up with. Was there other NLP-ish stuff that you've got on your list that I've maybe not mentioned here?
I do, but I think very much in relation to the case study. So I would like to bounce back of you the ideas that I have and see if I'm on the right track there. But let me first briefly describe the case. Very much, I think, what we've been discussing here today. So it is a 13-year-old child, and parents are separated. They divorced about a few years back. And in the past, when dad was still around, dad was very critical towards mom and the child throughout the entire life that the child can remember, and very harshly spoken as well. So it was naming and shaming and really painful. There was a lot of verbal abuse, I would say, when dad was still around. And alcohol, so dad was an alcoholic. I don't know if there was any history in Dad's family that could cause that. I didn't investigate that far yet. But the impact that it had on the child, it obviously had on mom too, but that's a different case. The child initially, as a younger child, so when Dad was still around, was very shy, not many friends, and cry a lot for any form of criticism at school, or maybe, you know, friends in the playground. Very insecure, a very low self-esteem. And that was at the beginning. As the child started growing and maturing, that wasn't around, but the impact was massive. I don't think that had much, spent much time with the child after the divorce. But it all turned into anger. So this is those two sides that we have. It was first that kind of flee, run away, exactly, be shy and quiet and withdrawn child. And then it turned into anger, because any form of criticism in the secondary school, when teachers are obviously more detailed, more specific, because they're driving you towards your GCSEs or any form of achievements, and they're trying to push you to the edge of your abilities, that was bounced with the anger, with the aggression, and the child ended up changing schools a few times within those 2 years of secondary school because of the issues and challenges that got into. Excuse me. And I think it all been going on for so long that even though the child starts defending and being that aggressive and I'm tough and, you know, what can you tell me, whatever you're saying, I don't care, or whatever, inside the insecurities remained. Because when I met the child, mom's concerns were mainly about the suicide and talking about I'm worthless, maybe it will be better if I end my life. I wonder what is it like on the other end? Will there be so much pain there? Oh, it will be better if I end this nonsense and all this be and that. So the insecurities that created what you described earlier during the growing up and those most important years when the child need nurturing to build that self-confidence, it wasn't there. And for whatever reason, mom wasn't strong. Mom was really suffering a lot, so mom wasn't strong enough to build, and then she reached out to professionals. So I'm not the first person they reached out to, but other sessions wasn't effective. Yeah, so I think that's in a nutshell the case study. And what I was thinking about is obviously what we've discussed, the disassociation, a little bit of submodalities, because I think there is a lot from the past. So changing that association with that and the impact those words had on the child, to change that, the weight of those words, and maybe change the colors, the audio, and, you know, the strength of all these things. And I was thinking also about swish pattern, but I don't know if, yeah, I think I will first try the submodalities and see the impact, and then swish pattern.
Sounds good.
So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so to put it into context for anyone who's watching and listening, so submodalities relate to the word modality, just means one of your 5 senses. So the word submodalities just means extra details about one of your 5 senses. And the reason why we use submodality interventions on memories from the past is because we're able then to, you know, if you've got a really vivid memory of something bad, someone hollering at you or putting you down, you can drain the color out of that image. You can maybe change the pitch of their voice, so they're still criticizing you, but their voice sounds like Mickey Mouse and super squeaky when they do it. Or you can slow them right down so they sound like Barry White, you know, and you just kind of, you can basically play around. If you imagine that memory is on a video, and that you can, you know, pause it, rewind it, change the contrast, put a frame around it that's pink and fluffy. You basically get to play with all of those sorts of details, and it breaks the old program. It means that that memory will not work in the same way for you anymore. It doesn't get rid of it. So we don't claim to be able to sort of wipe your brain and, you know, clean the hard drive. That's not quite how it works, but it is about changing the meaning that those old experiences have for you. So I think if she's got some specific memories, even if it's not related to dad, but it's related to maybe a teacher having been, you know, harsh with her in the past, that would still be a good one to work on. Because when we have these events that in our brain, they kind of get like linked together. So let's say that she had, you know, dad was rude to me one time, dad was aggressive to me one time, maybe mum was one time, then I had a bad teacher. And it's as if in our brain, because they're all carrying, those memories are all carrying a similar theme, they get strung together. If you think of each memory as being a pearl, then our brain kind of threads those pearls together, and it's like all of these are an example of me being criticized, and all of these cause me a problem. So we only have to work with one of those memories, and when we resolve that one, it has an impact on all of them that are on that same chain, that are on that same thread. So even if she doesn't maybe have, you know, very clear or specific memories of dad being critical of her, she's got recent memories, and we could use those, and certainly use submodalities exercise with them would be good. With the swish pattern, again, swish is a submodality exercise too, and it would work with a specific incident, and it helps us to replace that old memory with a new and more empowering vision of what she would like to be seeing instead. So yeah, equally, I think if she's got a specific incident in mind that she could work on, then swish could be valuable there as well.
There is a memory that the child have of an argument between mom and dad when they were still together or just about to get divorced, and that was really tough on mom, and in a similar way was really making mom feel bad about herself, very you know, naming, shaming her behaviors and abilities. And the child explained that situation from the child's perspective as I wish mom could have stand up for herself. I wish mom was strong enough. So I think that picture is playing strongly, not because only how that was treating the child, but also how mom felt after probably many years as well of that kind of treatment. How not weak, but overpowered, I think she felt. So I was thinking maybe swish will be good here to change that picture and replace with something different.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting how, like, generally speaking, I think human beings are very polarized. You know, like we're saying, you know, she was weak and now she is too strong. You know, we kind of go through this like Avengers
Screams.
style transition where it's like one extreme or the other. And I feel like we do that seesawing in lots of different aspects of life. You know, even things like this is just a relevant example, and it obviously doesn't apply to everybody's opinion, but for quite a long time, people haven't liked Meghan, Harry's wife. And then the interview comes out and everyone's like, oh no, poor Meghan. And it's like we've swung from one end to the other. And the reality is, like, somewhere in the middle is probably about where the truth is. You know, it's neither that or that. It's neither of those two things. And, you know, we, in a sense, kind of saw it last year when there was the Black Lives Matter movement, where it's like in one generation there is racism, and in the other generation we're like pulling down statues, and it's gone completely the opposite way. And it's like, actually, the sensible conversation is probably somewhere in the middle. But I feel like we're very good as humans at kind of like pivoting, and we're not well talented at balancing in any form of life. And it kind of sounds like that's, you know, really what this young lady's going through, is kind of going from weak to over strong, and actually we want to just have that balance where she's that special place in the middle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When
The
you
other,
said about, sorry, when you said about Megan, I was smiling because I just had a conversation today with a friend who had those opposite opinions
yeah,
before, prior to the interview, and then post interview. And it's absolutely fascinating watching how quickly people change. And obviously, interview is just what we were allowed to see. We don't know how much really happened and what's the truth. Yeah, very interesting.
it really is. The other thing I think could be relevant for this young lady would be giving her some training around self-talk. So we all talk to ourselves inside our head, and sometimes the quality of what we say is like beating ourselves over the head with a big stick, and sometimes it's slightly better than that. But it's not necessarily something that comes to us naturally, is to be positive and encouraging towards ourselves. And you know, she doesn't necessarily have her dad's voice in her head, but she's maybe got her own voice saying the kinds of things that he might have said to her. And
I'm
so
sure she does. And I think that's the hardest, when I thought about it, is how to make that switch because of what she was listening to growing up.
yeah,
And for all those many years, how all of a sudden now you switch to talk to yourself,
yeah,
to be more kind to yourself, to be more positive towards yourself and praise yourself. That's a massive step to actually reward yourself. When I mention the word reward yourself, treat yourself for any tiny good things that you've done, or you know, any little achievement or tiny goal that you managed to get to. She was like, what do you mean? What's a reward? How do I reward myself? I said, I don't know, go and get an ice cream. Do you like ice cream? So this is very difficult, and it will take a while, but I think it's very important that it starts inside.
absolutely. Yeah. I find that when it comes to the self-talk, there are two important factors, maybe three. The first one is the content of what you actually say to yourself needs to change. So, you know, if we, sometimes what I say to people is, if I could like fly inside your ear and just kind of sit inside your brain and listen to what you're saying to yourself, what kind of stuff am I going to hear? Like, tell me the actual sentences that you say. And so sometimes they might be using phrases like, you know, life is hard. And then I'll explain to them, you know, when you tell yourself things like that, it's like, you know, it's like physical and solid, and it's like stuckness. Whereas if you tell yourself life's not easy, it feels like there's a bit of wiggle room in here, I can make something happen. So sometimes I'll look at the actual words that they say and how to start shifting and shaping those. Sometimes I will talk to them about how they are saying what they say, you know, when they say it. So if they say to themselves, you know, God, you're such an idiot, it's like that's that's really vicious. You know, that's a really vicious tone. Whereas if you say to yourself like, God, you're such an idiot, then that's almost like you silly sausage, and it just carries a really different meaning with it. So I'll say to them, if you struggle to change the words, work on the tone, because you have a tone of voice inside your head as well, so we can change that. And then I guess like the third thing, which sometimes is important and relevant to do, because you don't always catch yourself in time or correct yourself in time when you have those thoughts in your head. Sometimes the best you can do is respond to it. So if the voice says, God, you're such an idiot, then have a comeback for that, you know, respond to it. And sometimes those responses, ideally, I always prefer it if we can like have a funny comeback, because then you can actually make yourself laugh. you can laugh at your own joke kind of thing. But sometimes you might just, it might need to be a shut the fuck up. Like, how dare you talk to me like that? And that we just, we squash it with our responses, and that we don't allow our self-criticism to impact us in the way that the original criticism from Dad way back when would have done. It's like, he shouldn't still have that power anymore. He's not even here. So, I don't want to beat myself up in the same way that he used to beat me up with his words. So I'm going to say the things now that I wish I could have said to him back then. It's just made me think of an example I want to share real quick. So I notice that my self-critical voice is potent and active when I am more tired. So the more tired I am, the less effective I am at noticing the critical voice and correcting it, because I'm just not paying as much attention. So I had this day when I came home from work and I was tired, and I'd gone into the kitchen and it was like, oh, I didn't do the washing up this morning. Like, for God's sake, if you just did it in the morning, then you wouldn't have to come home to it at the end of the day. This is because you're too lazy. And it was like, like in my head. And so I stood there and I did the washing up, and, but angrily, like I did angry washing up. And then I emptied the kitchen sink out and I turned around and there was a breakfast bowl that I'd missed that was on the side. And the voice inside my head went, oh, for God's sake, now you're going to have to refill the bowl of water, and you're going to have to wash up, and we're going to need to stand here and do even more all over again. And it was just like, like this. And I heard it and I caught myself. And my response to it was, it's just washing up a breakfast bowl though, isn't it? And then I started laughing to myself because I realized what I was doing. And, that whole kind of perspective shifted in a second. And I was like, oh my God, you literally teach this stuff for a living. Listen to what you're doing in there.
And I think that's the most valuable lesson, because sometimes we read so many books and we do so many courses, especially now online. We attend one after the other, but I remember a lot of impact in your posting recently about self-reflection. And being aware and present. And when I was doing research, I think I might still have the website open. I came across a Tiny Buddha website. So I follow that account on Instagram, and I went to the website, and there was how to deal with the criticism well, 25 reasons to embrace it. And obviously, apart from things like remaining calm and, that anger and defensiveness isn't actually helping when we're trying to deal with the criticism, there was a lot about paying attention. So processing those feelings rather than trying to get rid of them and dismiss them completely or squash them. In a nutshell, it was about paying attention, why they're there, and to remember that all our feelings, emotions, and also that feedback, that criticism is there for us in order to grow, to expand. And there is part about asking questions, which now remind me of another NLP techniques when we do chunking, which is quite typical in coaching in general. And I think I wrote those questions here. When we do chunking and when we receive that criticism or negative feedback, as I can say, because I don't like that word criticism. Now that you said it feels spiky, it almost fell on my back. But the negative feedback, when we receive the negative feedback, to ask yourself for what purpose, what's behind it, what's the intention of that person. But also one of my favorite in coaching is specifically. So why specifically, or what specifically? And I think that question have a massive strength. There is a power behind that, because we're going into those nitty-gritty details, and instead of focusing on how we're feeling, we're trying to find that purpose, that reason behind it. Where is that coming from? Whether there is actually something that I need to look into. Maybe there is, you know, something that I have to find the middle ground or find a resolution and improve, because there are actually a basis to it. Or if someone is just trying to be mean because they're jealous or because they have some personal, you know, emotional reasons behind it. I send a link to that page, because I think there is quite a few interesting tips there. I'm not going to read them all. I let our viewers read it themselves.
Perfect. I really like what you said there about the chunking questions and getting into the specifics, because it's so easy to imagine a scenario where somebody says to you, yeah, well, you do this and I don't like that about you. And sometimes when you go back to them with a, can you give me a specific example, or what specifically do you mean? There's suddenly like,
I don't know.
And at that point you realize this isn't about me.
Yeah.
This is about you.
Very
Yeah.
powerful for in coaching for me. So
Yeah, perfect. Nice. All right. Is there any other questions or tips or anything that you wanted to share today, Bella?
no, not that I can think of. I'm just checking if there is anything in our chat, but we don't have any questions there. I think of my notes, we went through most of it already, so thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was fabulous. I think when I sort of first thought about this topic, I was like, oh man, can we really talk for an hour about like criticism? It turns out we can.
Yeah, and when you say that word, talking about criticism for an hour, it feels heavy.
Yes.
But yes, there is so many aspects to it that we can make it lighter, and we can make it give it that positive spin, that is that driving wheel that will push us forward and make us better and stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge on this webinar this evening.
Thank you.
Oh, hang on, we have a question. What about very critical of a child, very critical of parent? Well, that's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? A child being very critical of a parent. I'm going to ask, it's from Emma. Emma, how old is said child? Because that might shed some light as well on the situation. I know that with our older young people, they often reach a point where they go from being children to being critical. When they hit those teenage years, they're suddenly 13. There we go. I called it. Yeah. All right. I know where you're coming from, Emma, on that one. Yeah, this is something that we often see. It's like they suddenly start developing a voice. What's actually happening here on a slightly more biological level is when our children become young adults and teenagers, they start to shift from almost being very much part of the family unit, whatever that dynamic might look like, to separating themselves quite deliberately and starting to kind of take impression and meaning and suggestion from other areas in their lives. So suddenly, but it's been going on for years, okay. So suddenly what happens for them is they're suddenly sort of like tuned into the outside world and going, huh, you don't do things in the way that Tom's mum does. You don't do things the way that YouTuber that I watch does. And then they suddenly start like regurgitating this and sort of putting it back in front of your face and going, this isn't as good as I would expect it to be. So unfortunately for Emma, this has been going on for some time. What other things might you want to add to what I've just said there, Bella?
I was just thinking about one, maybe learned behavior. So it
Yeah.
could be observing someone, listening to someone in family or friends circle and just repeating, and obviously listening for long enough to picking up on that. But I was thinking also about obviously what level it is, because I've got a little smarty in my house, and because English is my second language, every time I read them a bedtime story, they correct my accent and they correct my English. And when we now had the lockdown and homework, it was Daddy who was helping with math and Mommy with English. So yes, I received my portion of a negative feedback in regards to my level of English and grammar. And they started very early. So I think as soon as they went to school, so probably about 4 or 5 years old, when they were critical. But that was this type of separation. I think in the case of my children, that happened very early. They were trying to be the mature parent and teaching me how to speak English rather than learn behavior. So obviously, if Emma can share more, maybe we can give more specific answer to that, but maybe there is a learn behavior or something.
Yeah, maybe. Two things I've just thought of. One is going back to what we said earlier, where, you know, in my experience, if you don't bite, if you bite and then you give them attention, even though it might be negative because you're kind of, you know, going back at them, that tends to kind of fan the flames a little bit. We end up in that kind of loggerheads situation where it's who's going to be right at the end of this. Whereas when your response is, thank you for the feedback, it's like you just poured water over their flame, because it's like, where are you going to go from there? You know, you can keep criticizing me. My response will just be, okay, thanks for letting me know. Thank you for the feedback. And that's a way to kind of deprogram the behavior, is to stop giving them that fuel that you're going to react and respond to it. It's not always easy to do, because it's like swallowing a bitter pill to just kind of go, oh God, I just really hate what you just said to me. Thank you for the feedback. The other thing I would say is, if you've got, you know, quite a mindful 13-year-old that you're dealing with, actually like having a conversation with them about it and saying, you know, there are so many great things about you. This is the one thing that actually sometimes I find quite difficult and quite upsetting. And I would prefer it if we had the kind of relationship where we're always coming from a place of kindness. And so sometimes you might think something, but actually you don't need to share everything that you think. You know, so is it going to be helpful? Is it relevant? Or are you just saying it to be a smart ass? Because if you're just saying it to be a smart ass, you don't need to share that. But, you know, good for you for having your own mind and thinking your own thoughts and being a smarty pants. But actually, I don't always need to know that stuff. I don't always need to know what you're thinking, because I only want to hear as much as possible that you're coming from a place of kindness in how we interact with each other. So yeah, I think that could be a helpful conversation to have. Is that helpful for you, Emma? Have we given you a few ideas to play with there? I mean, 13, I think that there is definitely a basis for a conversation there, and to say, you know, you're smart, you're quick, you've got great ideas. I don't always need to know what they are. You know, you can keep some of those to yourself. And I think it is just about like retraining that behavior by putting the flame out. Yeah. All right. Anything else from you on that one, Bella?
No, I actually had something to say to your first point, but it skipped my mind now.
It will
You
come
probably
back.
covered already.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that there is a way to manage a situation like that. And it's really in some ways about kind of readdressing the dynamic around, you know, between me and my 13-year-old, which one of us is really in charge of the interaction here.
Yeah, and I think there is a bit of that power struggle. And as you said, if they feel that they can feed on that, they will just keep asking for more because they're dragging that energy out of you. So definitely something to consider as well.
Yeah, we got a bit more feedback from Emma. Yes, so she said, thanks, yes. She has autistic traits and low self-esteem. It's more personal insults. Any tips gratefully received? Oh, that's interesting. So with the autistic traits, sometimes what we see there is they're just factual and they're not always great at empathy and understanding, you know, the impact of what they say on others. I've had some like really now I can look back on it and say like they were really funny conversations, but some, you know, conversations with some autistic people in the past where it's a bit like, ow, you didn't need to point that out to me. There's one little boy I remember working with when I was actually doing my nursery nurse training, and he was in detention, and I was overseeing the detention, and he was sat next to me, and he was like getting really, really close to my head like this, and he was just sort of off to the side. And I looked at him and I went, Joseph, what are you doing? And he went, I've just noticed that you've got really furry ears. And I was like, okay, can you just carry on doing your work that you need to be doing? And he went, okay. And he wrote a little bit more, and then he looked up, and then he was like kind of here again. And I was like, Joseph, what are you doing? And he went, I like your furry ears. And then he carried on working again. And I remember going home that evening and like looking at my ears in the mirror and saying to my mum, like, is it weird that I've got like hair on my ears? Do most people have hair on their ears? Like, is this a thing? So, you know, Emma, in fairness to you, I think some of it, if she has these autistic traits, some of it might not be changeable. And then it may not be about changing her so much, but more about changing your own resilience towards those sorts of things that she might be saying, especially if it's like you said, you know, it's sort of personal insults. Oh, like I can imagine that being like quite heartbreaking at times. If you can do those sort of dissociation things, and you know, I would still remind her that think about like what kindness looks like and what kindness doesn't look like. Because if we can teach her even in sort of quite a factual way, she might not get it from the empathy side, but she might actually start to learn it from the factual side of these are the sorts of things that it's okay to say and these things are not. I think we can kind of educate her around it rather than give her the emotional intelligence that, you know, she might be missing. But some of it might as well just be more for you to like productize yourself and to remember, you know, she's not saying it to cause hurt or pain towards me. This is the way that she's observing things. That's not to say that her observations are accurate. You know, she might say that doesn't look good on you. That doesn't mean that her observation is accurate. That's just, again, that's her sharing her opinion. So I think still applying those responses like thank you for your feedback, thank you for your opinion, if it won't work on her, I think it could be helpful for you. You know, I think in those moments it allows you to sort of go, there's the opinion, thank you very much, I'm parking that over there, and that you don't have to sort of digest it, if that makes sense. So I think that might, you know, that might be a portion of what needs to happen here is changing the way in which you take it on board so that you don't take it as personally, even if they are quite personal insults. Bella, anything you can add to that?
No, nothing else coming to my mind now. I think you covered it very well.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Oh, I hope that's been helpful for you, Emma. I can appreciate the challenge that there is with that one because you know, those with that are on that spectrum can just be very, very matter of fact about things. And I'll tell a quick story before we wrap up this evening. I was working in actually it was in Windsor Boys School, and I was using a room which was off of their library. And I remember there was a group of boys I was working with, one of whom was on the spectrum. And I went to set my room up, and sort of walking through the library, which just like reeked of Lynx Africa because it was all teenage boys in there. And then I set up in my room, and then I went off to fetch the young man that I was working with. And I remember coming out of that room and sort of stepping back out into the library, and they were all sort of nosing in, and you know, and I was sort of thinking, I just had this feeling like one of these boys is going to step into this room when I'm out, and they're going to do something. Like they just look mischievous, you know, they look like they were up to stuff. And so anyway, I went off and got my client, brought him back. So this is the chap that's on the spectrum. And on the way back, I said to him, I don't know what's going to have happened, but I'm just warning you, when we walk into the room, I think something's going to be a bit out of place, because the boys were looking in like they were up to no good. So when we step inside the room, you know, if my paperwork is everywhere or something like that, that's not me, that's something that's happened. So we walked into the room and I was kind of looking around like, you know, is everything still where I left it? And then I looked up and the clock that was on the wall had been turned upside down. And so then I knew, that, like, they were coming, I knew they were going to come in and do something. So I said to my client, I see what they've done. They've turned the time upside down. And he looked at me and he went, what do you mean? And I said, look, on the wall, look, they've turned the time upside down. And he went, no, they haven't. And I went, yeah, they have. Like, it's clearly upside down. And he went, Gemma, you cannot turn time upside down. Time is linear. They've turned the clock upside down. And I was like, okay. If you say so. So yeah, they can be, you know, very factual. All right, so a couple of other bits from Emma. She said, it's generally, I'm a useless parent and telling me to shut the F up. Wow. If I ask for anything like, do you want breakfast? Lots of useful things to take away from this evening. Thank you. The joys of a demand avoidant profile. Oh, God love you, Emma. Hang in there. I think you can. Listen, you're not going to permanently, you know, completely change her neurology because she's built a certain way. But I do think that you can at least make life a little bit easier on yourself. And some of that is probably just going to be from your self-protection, as well as doing what you can to, you know, just slightly shift the way in which she might be reacting and responding at times. I think come at it from a conversation around kindness. I think that's your way to go, for sure. All right, fabulous. So I think that is us wrapped up for the evening. Reminders around, do head on over to superheroes.org/donations if you are able to. Lots of love hearts back to you, Emma, as well. And please donate if you can. We do have more webinars, so the next batch will be starting on Monday. So you can get to those via u.nu/LPSS, and you'll see the spreadsheet of all of the remaining upcoming webinars. And we will put this one onto YouTube so you can watch it back, watch all of the others that are there and available as well. And there'll be some links in the description there if you want to get yourselves hold of some further content. All right, fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Bella.
Thank you very much. It was fantastic. Thank you. And thanks for all the tips.
No problem. All right, pleasure to talk to you. Everyone, take care. Have yourselves a good evening.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.